Okay, so thank you so much for having me, and I think this is a great initiative by Cinevidya, and I'm so glad that we have quite a few people joining in with us today. So this is going to be fun, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through fundamentally two things, characters and story, and the narrative. And I think what we will do is today I'm going to be largely be focusing on characters and what goes into the making of a character, and how does one create a character. What are the considerations for a character, what are the things you need to think about when you're creating your character. And then from then onwards, obviously eventually it is about the story. How do you see a character in the context of a story? So I think I will dive right in, and yeah, I think we will probably be taking questions. So I think you can send in your questions, and hopefully towards the end of the session, we can I can address some of those. So let's get started. Can I share my screen?
Yes, sir, you can.
Super. Okay, are you guys able to see this?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Super. Splendid. Okay, so let's dive in. So, I think one of the first things that you want to understand before you go about creating your character, when you talk about characters, whether it's an animated character or a live action character or whatever kind of story you want to say, is to understand your audience. Who is your audience? Who are you speaking to? That's the most important thing, that before you dive in, you need to do some research about the audience. Uh, Obviously, when you talk about animation, one of the biggest factors is age. And we obviously talk about age appropriate content. Now, what does age appropriate content mean? So when you talk about age appropriate content, is that, as you know, animation is being consumed right from, I would say, literally the age of 0 to 80. There's no age for you to consume animation. I mean, I still watch cartoons, I create cartoons. My father, who's touching it, he still watches cartoons, although he'll probably not admit that, but he enjoys watching it. So I think that is one aspect that we need to think about. So now, when you talk about something which is appropriate for, let's say, a 5-year-old, and what probably a 60-year-old person or a 16-year-old person is watching is fine. So something which is probably created for toddlers, everyone can watch. But something which is created for a much older audience, which is, let's say, a teenager, So for example, if you're talking about something like, let's say, Spider-Man, or if you're talking about something like Power Rangers, now that kind of high action, maybe potentially some blood and gore as well into the content, you don't want to be, allowing your 2-year-old to watch stuff like that. I mean, the stuff that 2-year-old going to be watching is soft, sweet stuff, So I think that's one critical thing. The other is, when I talk about sex, is again, it's about whether is it for a male audience, whether it's for a female audience, or whether is it meant for both. So that's the other consideration when you talk about creating content. And third, obviously, the language. And this in particular, actually more than language, I would say it's the culture. So when you talk about language, is it meant for an Indian audience? Is it meant for a global audience? These are the considerations that you need to really keep in mind. That what is the language. And there are some very clear distinctions when you talk about creating global characters and you creating kind of interesting characters. It's also because of the fact that you want to look at creating a character which, if you want to make sure it travels right across the world, then there are certain considerations that you have to keep in mind. Like, for example, whatever you want to talk about, ensure that you skip talking about religion or gods. I mean, like, as you'll see that, I think in India, we are really fascinated about our mythology. So we have lots of animations, films and characters coming in from our mythology, be it Hanuman, be it Krishna, We've also had, different characters, and different series. Now, the problem with some of these kind of content is, well, it obviously work very well in India, but may not work well outside India. In fact, a lot of the broadcasters and distributors have a policy not to touch any content that is potentially, has any kind of religious connotation. So that's, these are some of the things, and I will talk about these as we dive in, as we go through different kinds of characters, what kind of characters they are, and then we'll dive in a little deeper. So if we talk about animation, there are broadly 3 age segments. One is the toddlers, which is basically 0 to 4, and this is one of the most sensitive ages, one of the most impressionable ages as well. And I think you want to be very, very careful about what you're putting out there, what your kid is watching, and I think also how much he's watching. That's again a very, very critical aspect. That how much time is that toddler, spending in front of a screen. The other obviously is the 5 to 10, which is the bulk or the meat of the audience today. If you look about, when you talk about channels like Cartoon Network, Disney, Nickelodeon, that's the age group. 5 to 10 is the age group that they are targeting. It's actually more 5 to 8, but I would say that that's the age that they are targeting. And then obviously is the tween audience, which is the 10 plus, which is the age where we find that a lot of the kids audience starts also consuming live action, and probably they want to look cool, so they might possibly not admit that they're watching animation, but at the same time they will definitely want to watch. So they'll probably watch a lot of live action stuff. So they'll get into the Marvel's Avengers, or DC comics, and probably once in a while watch the kiddie stuff. Maybe watch some of the other shows like Chota Beam or something like that. But they'll probably, they don't want to be then caught saying, "Oh, you are still a kid, you watch cartoons." So now, what makes a character? What is the DNA of a character? To me, when I look at creating a character, there are 4 things. The look, what is the visual design of the character? How does it look, right? So when we think of an animated character, there is instinctively we think of bright, colorful characters, really cute characters, big eyes, funny clothes, right? So that's what makes it interesting, right? The other critical aspect is the voice of the character. Right. Now, that's the big thing when you are creating an animated character. It's not like you are casting a Shah Rukh Khan or an Amitabh Bachchan or an Amir Khan, or a Ranveer Singh, that he comes with his personality, he comes with his certain voice, you have to create that. You have to marry the two, marry the look of the character and marry the voice. Both these things have to kind of be fused together. And I think that combination is very, very critical, that you typically want to make sure that when you design a character, your voice that you're giving, because you're obviously you're using an actor, a voice actor, right? So when you're using a voice actor, how does he or she, sound? Does that sound go well with the character? And again, I'll again talk a little bit more about this later. The third, obviously, and the most critical part of this, obviously, aspect is the personality. What kind of a person this character is? Obviously the classic, whether he's a hero or whether he's a villain, but there are more shades to a character. Whether he is a funny guy, whether he's a serious guy, whether he laughs a lot, is he confident, is he aggressive, does he like to fight? These are all things that make his personality. Is he jealous, is he insecure, what is his relationship with other people, for example, with his friends, do his friends want to hang around with him, or is he a loner? These are all the considerations that go into a character. What is the personality? And then, the last part is eventually is what I call as a secret sauce. What makes a character memorable? Over the years, when you look at any character today, what are the characters that stick in your mind? And I'm going to take an example of this from Bollywood, and let's look at basically some of the Bollywood characters today, right? And I think here, this is my favorite example to give, is that two of the biggest Bollywood stars today, and is obviously one is Shah Rukh Khan and the other is Amir Khan. Shah Rukh, both are stars in their own right? But to me, when I look at Shah Rukh Khan, he looks like Shah Rukh no matter whichever movie I pick up. Even to the extent of Veer Zara, which is a period classic, and he still kind of looks the same. Whether kind of almost similar looking as Dilwale Dulhaniya Le Jayenge. Whereas someone like Amir Khan on the other side, his look has changed dramatically, from every movie. And I think in the last, I would say about 15 years, he's made a conscious effort to really work on that, which is he really kind of molds himself into a character. And I think that is a very, very critical aspect. What happens is that how do you manage to fit yourself? And I think, and I'm actually going to be showing, a clip of some of my favorite films of Amir Khan, and we'll talk a little bit about that, So can I request the team to play the video of Amir Khan, please?
Yes, sir. Just a moment.
दोस्तों, सबसे पहले तो शुक्रिया सेकेंड ईयर स्टूडेंट्स का, जिन्होंने हम फाइनल ईयर स्टूडेंट्स के लिए आज ये शानदार पार्टी दी है. थैंक्स अ लॉट. वी मिस यू. हमारे लिए कॉलेज का ये आखिरी दिन है और मैं जानता हूं कि आने वाली जिंदगी के लिए सभी ने कुछ न कुछ सोच रखा है, लेकिन मैंने अपने लिए कुछ नहीं सोचा है.
कौन करेगा खत्म? हाँ कौन? अरे खत्म कौन करेगा?
मैं.
ओए!
जिंदगी जीने के दो ही तरीके होते हैं. एक, जो हो रहा है होने दो, बर्दाश्त करते जाओ, या फिर जिम्मेदारी उठाओ उसे बदलने की.
जाओ, सबको खबर करता हूं. आजादी की जंग शुरू. मंगल, इस इनकलाब को तुम्हारी जरूरत है. इस इनकलाब को खून की जरूरत है. उसे मेरा होने दो.
आज मैं तुम लोगों को एक कहानी सुनाऊंगा. एक लड़के की कहानी.
चकरकची चाचो चकलोरम गंडो वंडो लकरकटम अक्को टक्को इडी गिडी गिडी गो इडी पाई चिकी चकचो गिली गिली मल सुलु सुलु मल मकनक हुकु बुकुरे टुकु बुकुरे चकलक बिक्को चिक्को सिली 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 गो बगड़दुम चिकी चकचो.
शर्त यह है कि तुम हमको इस खेल में हराओ और हम तुम्हारा लगान माफ कर देगा. शर्त मंजूर है? बोलो.
शर्त मंजूर है.
इस खेल के बारे में क्या जानते हो?
एक ससुरा दौड़ के डंडियों के पास से गोला फेंका है और फल्ली वाला फल्ली से गोले को दे घुमा है और फिर सब जने तितर बितर भागे लगा है। बस दिन भर ही चलत रहता है।
He knows nothing.
ये तो 3 गुना लगान है। सबकी जिंदगी तोरे हाथ में कचरा।
रंचो, रणछोड़ दास, श्यामल दास, चांचर, जितना अलग साले का नाम था उतनी ही अलग सोच।
सर आप जानते हैं हम कौन है?
प्राइम मिनिस्टर का बेटे हो तो भी आई विल नॉट एक्सेप्ट योर पेपर।
सर आपको हमारा नाम और रोल नंबर पता है?
नहीं पता है। दिल है ना, बड़ा डरपोक है यार। इसको बेवकूफ बना के रखो। लाइफ में कितनी भी बड़ी प्रॉब्लम हो ना, उसको बोलो कोई बात नहीं चाचू, सब ठीक ठाक है, ऑल इज वेल, ऑल इज वेल,
और उससे प्रॉब्लम सॉल्व हो जाएगी।
नहीं लेकिन उसको झेलने की हिम्मत आ जाती है।
कभी ने बाबा को स्कूटर पे ले आया
तो क्या
हर खिलाड़ी की तरह मेरा भी सपना था, देश के लिए गोल्ड मेडल लाना। जो मैं करना चाहता था वो हमारा बेटा करके दिखावेगा। देश के लिए गोल्ड जीतेगा हमारा बेटा, अपना तिरंगा सबसे ऊपर लहरावेगा।
मुबारक हो भाई साहब, चौथी भी छोरी हुई है।
मैं आपको छोरा ना दे पाई।
वो बात मेरी समझ में ना आई कि गोल्ड तो गोल्ड होता है, छोरा लावे या छोरी।
पहलवानी तो सिर्फ छोरे करें।
हमारी छोरियां छोरों से कम है के?
Okay. So I hope you guys enjoyed watching that clip. And I think the point I'm trying to make here is the fact that when you look at Amir's characters in all these movies, you know, he looks different, right? Whether it's clothes, whether even his physicality, right from, like for example in the movie like Dangal, right? He looks so different, and he actually beefed himself up, and then he slimmed down again, So I think that's what to me always makes it interesting, that how you are able to see an actor in different roles. And I think one of the interesting things for me is all the villains in Bollywood, So if you look at the villains today in Bollywood, or rather over the last so many years, some of them have been iconic, So they've been iconic in the sense that you remember them. In fact, to me, the classic example actually is Sholay, right? Everyone remembers Gabbar Singh. We may not remember Jai and Veeru from the movie, but we'll definitely remember Gabbar Singh, So I'm now going to be playing a clip of all the villains. Look at here's what I want you guys to observe. Look at their attire, their clothes, their dialogue delivery, their quirks, right? Some of these villains have very unique dialogues, right? They always use in the film, like Gabbar Singh kitne aadmi the, or Mogambo from Mr. India saying Mogambo khush hua, or Ajit saying Sara Sheher mujhe lion ke naam se janta hai. These movies are old, like maybe 15, 20 years old, 30 years old, but even today, you may not remember the name of the movie, you may not remember probably the actor or the hero from that movie, but you definitely will remember these villains. So let's play those the villain clips, please.
Yes, sir.
छप्पन टिकले।
शैतान ही का देवता है और शैतान ही का मालिक। मुझे मेरा कर्म पूरी तरह निभा लेने दे।
कल करे सो आज कर, आज करे सो
अब हाँ अब
मेरे मन को भाया, मैं कुत्ता काट के खाया, लोमड़ी का दूध पी के पला है ये जगीरा, हमसे ना भिड़ियो।
डर मत मेरी जान, डर मत, मैं कुछ नहीं करूंगी, मैं कुछ कर ही नहीं सकती। जानती हो क्यों? क्योंकि मैं आधा मर्द हूँ और आधी औरत। देखना, ना रूप ना रंग, देखिए किस्मत का खेल तो देख। अगर कुछ है ना मेरे पास तो वो है दिमाग।
शॉर्ट टर्म मेमोरी लॉस।
अब तेरी जिंदगी के आखिरी 15 मिनट में मैं तुझे पूरा एक्शन रिप्ले करके दिखाता हूँ, देख तू।
प्रेम नाम है मेरा, प्रेम चोपड़ा।
बहुत दिनों बाद एक हिंदुस्तानी मछली हमारे समंदर में दिखाई दिया। इसे रात के खाने पे बुलाओ।
बढ़ाओ भाईचारा बढ़ाओ, मिले सुर मेरा तुम्हारा तुम चाय चा। घंटा घंटा मेरा कुछ बिगाड़ोगे तुम लोग। कल शपथ लेनी है, मी मंत्री महोदय श्री श्री जयकांत करे।
थप्पड़ की गूंज सुनी तुमने? अब इस गूंज की गूंज तुम्हें सुनाई देगी।
लेकिन एक बात मत भूलिए डीएसपी साहब, कि सारा शहर मुझे लॉयन के नाम से जानता है, और इस शहर में मेरी हैसियत वही है जो जंगल में शेर की हो।
मोगेम्बो खुश हुआ।
सुना आप लोगों ने क्राइम मास्टर गोगो के कारनामे। जब कोई बच्चा नहीं सोता तो उसकी माँ कहती है कि सो जा सो जा सो जा, नहीं तो गोगो आ जाएगा। क्राइम मास्टर गोगो, आंखें निकालकर गोटी खेलूंगा गोटी। हैंड्स अप, हैंड्स अप का मतलब हाथ ऊपर। हैंड्स अप, ऊपर ही तो थे। चलो फॉलो मी।
कितने आदमी थे
सरकार? 2 आदमी।
अरे ओ सांबा, कितना इनाम रखे हैं सरकार हम पर? पूरे
Thank you for playing that. Okay. So, Rahul Patil had raised a question while I was watching, saying that what are the characteristics of a good villain? And I think that's a great question when you talk about characteristics. So I think what we need to look at is basically what are his key driving points. How does a villain react to a situation? How does he? What is his driving force, right? So if you look at Gabbar Singh, he's a dacoit, right? If you look at Mogambo, he wanted to capture the entire country and become the emperor of the world. So these are their driving forces. Why is the villain a villain? Is there a past to him? That something happened in his childhood or something happened to him? Was there a greater injustice to him, which eventually led to him making certain decisions and go towards crime? So you need to work out some of these backstories for a character, not just for a villain, for every character. There needs to be a backstory. What is his story? How was he born? To whom was he born? What is his family? What is his upbringing like? Is he rich? Is he poor? Is he an emotional character? These are all the decisions that you need to make. And I think the biggest challenge, I would say, or I would rather probably use the word, the biggest exciting thing about animation is that as a creator or as a director, you make those choices. As when you're doing a live action movie, when you cast an Amitabh Bachchan, you get a persona that comes with him. So when an audience sees Amitabh Bachchan on screen, that what you can expect. For example, today, if you look at a Ranveer Singh, you know what to expect. If you look at Nawazuddin Siddiqui, you know what to expect today, right? From that actor, he will bring a certain caliber of performance. He will come with great dialogue delivery. So these are things that come. But I think when you're doing an animated character or we're designing an animation character, you need to think about all these things. You are the Shah Rukh Khan, you are the Amrish Puri, you are the hero, you are the villain, you are the sidekick. So you need to look at all these things, in terms of the look and defining the look of your character. The other, obviously, the important thing is the voice, because if you see, the voice plays such a big role, right? Like even today, some of these dialogues, they are so memorable. Like, I don't know if you guys noticed, but the Shakti Kapoor movie where he becomes a crime master, Gogo, he actually reused the famous lines, जब बच्चा सोता है तो लोग कहते हैं कि crime master Gogo आएंगे, which is a straight rip off of the original Gabbar Singh line. So as you can see that some of these lines become so iconic that you want to keep people end up reusing them, sometimes even spoofing them. So that is a secret sauce, the memorability of a character. That how does a character stick in your mind? So therefore you have to do something different. And I think some of the the villains of Bollywood, they did a great job, in terms of becoming memorable. And I think that's what we need to even look at for our characters. Like let's now look into and dive into some of the characters. So this is the original Mickey Mouse. I don't know if how many of you have ever seen this. So the first Mickey Mouse film that was Steamboat Willie, and I think you should look it up. It's a nice fun film. Into the black and white, right? From that to the Mickey Mouse that you see today, obviously is very different. He's a 3D animated character. Again, I think this is a 2D animated character. And I think this is again one more aspect in animation is also what is the style of animation that you're talking about, and that impacts your character design. When you talk about whether are you doing 2D animation, are you doing 3D animation, are you doing stop motion animation, what or puppets, even. So what is the kind of animation style you're going with? That will also impact your design. So if you're doing stop motion, then obviously there is a physicality to the character that you need to have a physical model. So you will have limitations of what you can or cannot do, right? But if you're doing a 2D character, completely, you're pretty much free to imagine what your character should look like. Or if you're creating a 3D character, you are again free to design the way you want them to. And all these mediums today, they give you such phenomenal flexibility. The tools of animation have improved so much. So I'm just going to quickly go through some of the characters, that over the years have become iconic. Miffy, this is one of my favorite animated characters. This character is probably at least 65 to 70 years, right? And even today, this character is a hit property in the preschool or even the toddler sector. Obviously, they've now converted it into 3D animation. So this is the 2D design, and this is the 3D design. Again, it's been adapted with the times. And hugely popular with kids, very, very limited dialogue, very sweet property. Again, this is another classic, Charlie Brown and Snoopy and Peanuts, the Peanuts comic strip, Again, I mean, the Charlie Brown character, is such an iconic character. And if you look at the personality of Charlie Brown, he's not a hero. He's actually a loser, right? But he's become so endearing that people want to watch it. Or even Snoopy as a dog, he's become such a great character, that people want to watch it. He became, I think if I recollect correctly, Snoopy became a mascot for one of the, I think, airline companies, or was it the division? They adopted the character as a mascot. So some of these characters have endured time, and they become memorable. They stick in your mind, and they stand the test of time. And I mean, and this is from the recent Peanut movie, which was again, as you can see, it's a 3D animated design. Again, very, very popular. They retained some of the unique aspects about their character. Like if you see, for example, the way their shapes, the mouth shapes are drawn, they're very similar, to the original ones. They all have very wide smiles, And between these two designs, it looks the same. So, this is again very, very critical, right? So when you look at a character, you want to, when you sometimes want to adapt, move from 2D to 3D to keep up and keep the design fresh, but you still want to ensure that some of the aspects of your character, for example, they don't change. Whether it's the way Snoopy's ears are, or whether it's Marcy's hairstyle, although it's in 3D, you still see them, or the freckles on her face. If you see, it's the same. Whether if you see, like you see the 3 dots here on her face, and even in the 3D again, you see the same 3 dots. Then again, so there is the Peppa Pig. This is again a huge global hit in terms of characters. Wonderful series. And I think what's great about the show is also the voicing. It's brilliant voicing. If you listen to these shows, it's fantastic. Again, see, this is a family of pigs. Look at how they have been humanized. They have stand up. They are wearing shoes. They have hands and legs. Look at their attire. Simple shapes. Again, this is also one thing that, depending on the age of what your audience is, and who you're targeting, your design complexity will change. Like Peppa Pig is meant for a younger audience, so the design is simple. Look at the frame, right? There is not that much complexity in the frame. It's very limited, right? SpongeBob, again, this is a completely fictional character. I mean, this character is a sponge, a sponge who lives at the bottom of the sea. And I think this is again something really interesting, that this show took almost, I think, 15-20 years. I'm sorry, maybe almost 10 years. The first time when the creator pitched it, to the networks, they rejected the idea that why would a kid be interested in a sponge, and he was just ahead of his time. This was, the creator actually created this character for his children, and when they were growing up, and he used to tell them stories using these characters. But over a period of time, once this character took on, I mean, this was launched on Nickelodeon, channel in the US, and it became a huge hit. Look at the designs, like if you look at, his body and hands, right? Look at this thing, where his mouth is, where his hands are, look at his pants, or look at this character, look at where his eyes are, literally sticking out, So if you look at the designs, like this character has no neck. So the thing is that this is what is great about animated characters, that you can go to town when it comes to the design. Your characters don't have to be human. They can be, it can be a toaster for all I care, and you can have fun with that character. It's what is, again, it's also about what is it that you're trying to say with this character. What is the story aspect? Like one of the shows, one of the characters that we've created is World of Pooh. This is for a very, very young audience, and these are characters which basically represent sound. So this is Dore, Mifa, Sola, and Tito, and they are all different characters. They all have their own personalities, But look at the simplicity of the design. Look at the background, right? Very, very minimal colors, right? Very, very simple. The animation and the action, it's focused in the center. So you can see all the action happening in the center of the screen. The background is very, very limited, because at that age, at that 0 to 5, for a child, the peripheral vision, is not that well developed. So when a child is looking at his world, he's looking at it like this, right? So whatever you do or create, you have to ensure your action is focused right in the center of the screen. You want nice, bright colors which pop, and again, not too much in terms of texture, not too much in terms of detail. You don't want to overcomplicate it. Even if you look at, for example, let's for a second just jump back to Miffy. Look at the simplicity of this design, right? The visual design. The mouth is just an X. The eyes are dots. Straight, simple colors. Primary colors. Look at the shapes. Like if you notice, they don't even have fingers, right? So this is what one needs to even to that how there's so much attention that is given, to the look of the character. Again, like if you see her fantasy, mixing of characters. So you have a set of imaginary characters, and what these characters are. Like if you look at something like Doraemon, like the lead character is a boy who has, typical boy issues. He has homework issues. There's a bully who basically constantly troubles him, and then Doraemon comes to his rescue. And every child wants, to be rescued, or someone who can take care of his homework, someone whom he can talk to, who can relate to. That becomes very, very vital for a child. So again, I think one of my other favorite shows is Powerpuff Girls. This is among the few girl properties, which was loved. I think both, even boys watched it. But again, these three girl characters who were created, they were just such wonderful designs. If you look at the design of them, huge eyes, very small body, and if you look at the silhouette of their characters, right? Again, this is again very, very critical. Like if you look at the silhouette of this character, like imagine if you were to convert this into a black and white drawing, you would literally see a different silhouette for each one of them. Like she has got two ponytails on the side, she has got this huge hair clip on the top, and then she has a short blunt cut, right? So that becomes very, very, very critical. That how, like when you think of your design, you have to also sometimes look at it from when you look at the silhouette of the design and see, is it distinct enough so that even if I'm using a shadow of a character, I should be able to make out what that character is. And then obviously, in India, I was telling you that we are usually inspired from our own mythology, which is great. I mean, Chhota Bheem is a great example of that. Earlier it was 2D and now it's been converted to 3D. Even Little Krishna, there are some wonderful stories around him, so some of these have been adapted to animation. So again, now if you look at the stories around these characters, they're simple stories. I think the critical factor when you look at a character and the character is solid, you want your audience to fall in love with your character first. Once you fall in love with that character, then you want to look at, what is this character doing? Your audience is then going to be invested, into that character and saying, yes, kya karega ye banda? Will he, there is, in every story, there is typically, at least in animation films, there is always, a nice happy ending and everyone wins. The hero always triumphs over the villain. It's the how, how does a hero do it, right? What does he do? And in his own way, right? If he's strong, he'll beat the shit out of him. If he's smart or witty, then he will trick him, maybe he will use his intelligence, not his brute power, So it's about what the driving force of the character is. What is he doing? Again, the other thing is, this is again one of my favorite movies from Japan, Spirited Away. This is, Hayao Miyazaki. He's one of the most iconic, animators and creators from Japan, and he's created some amazing characters, and there's now a museum which has been dedicated to his creations, But just the kind of world that he creates, the designs that he creates is just fascinating to look at, and completely fictionalized. I mean, just when you look at this frame here, like if you see, look at how he's playing with proportions, of this lady, this villain who's there, and look at the girl, right? And she's got this huge boil over here, right? So when you look at this in the frame, you understand that, yeah, this is a character. But when you see all of them in a frame, you are able to accept them, and you are able to understand that, okay, what is this character about? I think animation as a medium is far more flexible. It's the suspension of reality, right? You completely ignore reality. You are transported in a complete world of fantasy. And I think Miyazaki is one of the masters of that game, that he's able to completely take you in a completely different zone, and yet, his characters will be endearing, they may not be human, but you will still feel their emotion. It's about, again, this is about how emotionally invested are you with your character, how emotionally invested your audience is. Is your audience concerned about what is happening with your character in the story, right? That is when you got them hooked. Again, another interesting aspect is when you talk about the design visual look, is stop motion. Is again a great medium, and Wallace and Gromit, they are wonderful characters. This was created by a studio called Aardman from UK, and Aardman Animation. Again, they do some wonderful work. straightforward, simple designs, their expressions, the way they are designed. There are a lot of considerations, when you're doing stop motion. Like the way, for example, his mouth is wide open here. If he again wants to have his mouth closed, typically in stop motion, you would then change his head and put a different head and then expose one frame, shoot one frame, and then go on to the next one. So because here you are not really physically changing anything or morphing anything, right? So stop motion is literally, that's why it's called stop motion. You look at motion, you take one frame, like this is a frame. I would then expose it, hold on to it, and then go back and change something slightly. For example, he's playing a violin here, right? So I would move this bow down, like a couple of inches, and then expose the frame. Then I would move this bow even further down and then expose one more frame. And that's how I would create motion. And that medium has its own charm, And you should, you should look up this. This is a wonderful series, Wallace and Gromit. I'm sure you'll find it online. So if you look at these characters, like when you look at characters like Miffy, or Peppa Pig, they're for that young audience, maybe 3, 4, 5-year-olds, right? And then you have things like, for example, something like a Chota Bheem or a Little Krishna or Powerpuff Girls, or Doraemon. I mean, these are all for the 5 to 10 age-year-old. And then, once you go past that age, you get into the really high action scenario, right? Which is where something like Power Rangers come. It's all about fancy gadgets, gizmos, what cool weapons they have, what different kinds of weapons they have, how do they defeat. So again, these are larger than life characters, right? When they are fighting, they become really massive, as tall as buildings, and then they're fighting amongst them. So the scale of destruction that you see, is a very different level. Like you have giants as tall as buildings fighting with one another, right? It gives a very different spectacle. And then obviously the ever popular superhero genre. Again, I think what's interesting to understand, and this is where I would say that there are there are whole bunch of characters and there are a whole bunch of superheroes, but there are 3 that to me, are they've always kind of stayed in my mind, and especially I use these 3 characters whenever I talk to students or talk to young creators. Superman, Spider-Man, and Batman. To me, Superman is the most boring character, right? Literally, because he's super strong, he's super powerful. He literally is, he's goody two shoes. He cannot do anything wrong, and therefore, to me, he's a very flat character. There's not too much to him, eventually. And if you see some of the recent movies, particularly live action movies, they've tried to change that a little bit. And even in the comics, as you see that you start seeing, sometimes they portray him in a slightly negative tone, or when he goes bonkers and the things he does, because you need to have that dimensionality in your character. He cannot always be good. You need to see the conflict in a character. And I think that is where something like Spider-Man, right? He's constantly conflicted, right? I mean, from the time he got his powers, and he lost his uncle, right? Uncle Ben, because he chose not to act, because he was just upset on a particular day and he let a villain go. And that same guy eventually shot his uncle, and that stayed with him forever. That always haunted him. And that gives it a very, so when you look at Spider-Man, he's very vulnerable. You see a human side of him a lot more, right? So he's never come to terms with his powers. He's never been able to balance his superhero life and his real life, and they're always clashing against one another. And then we have someone like Batman, So Batman again is to me, among these 3 characters, he's one of my favorite, because when we talk about heroes and villains, it's a black and white, right? But when you talk about Batman, he's all gray. There is nothing. I mean, right from the fact that he doesn't have any superpowers, right? Like Spider-Man was bit by radioactive spider, so he could cling to walls and he could climb and he could swing. He has got super spidey senses, right? Superman obviously has super strength. Batman has 0 powers, right? he molded himself into the superhero, right? Because he wanted to fight crime, and his motivation was that a bunch of criminals came and killed his parents right in front of him. And that always troubled him. And he always, therefore, wanted to protect his city, Gotham, against these evil forces. And that's why he's a constant crime crusader. Again, he's so obsessed by this part of it, that he doesn't have a personal life, right? You would see him that, yeah, he's not in a relationship, or even if he is, he has trouble accepting it, right? So, and there are times where he while he's fighting criminals, sometimes he is not always playing straight. He sometimes becomes a criminal himself. He is on the wrong side of the law, right? That's not how Superman is. Superman is straight as an arrow. He's always good. So that to me, that's why if you look at the kind of the number of movies that have happened and how successful they've been, I think in the recent times the movies of Spider-Man and Batman have been far more successful, and they are far more interesting. And then finally, the other interesting character that I really like is Wonder Woman. Again, she stood for feminism. She stood for the bold new women. For the time and era it was created, it was quite radical to see a woman, in the shape of or rather as a superhero or as an action hero. It was about empowering women. And I think the creators really made a bold choice about it, at that point of time, and creating something unique and something different. So again, I think it's, if you look at these characters, right, that many times the creator has a certain point of view that he wants to put out. Like with Wonder Woman, there was a point of view, right? That let's have a strong woman character, who becomes like a mascot for the women of today. And I think that becomes very interesting for as a character. And I think, again, this is one of the reasons why Wonder Woman stands out, among all the other. Again, there were not many women characters, at least in the superhero genre, but she's the one who still stands out, and she has endured the test of time. So as you can see, if you look at these images, right, the visual design, I'm just going to flip through the design of some of the characters. They're so different, right? I mean, you are only limited by your imagination, and I'm going to show you again something that has always inspired me, and I'm going to show you something which is basically from an animated series that we created called Krish Station Balti Boy. And for me, the inspiration has been the folk arts of India. And I always felt that it's a fascinating world. And I think there are a lot of young creators who are today, potentially here, and hopefully someday you will become famous animators, famous creators, directors, And I would urge all of you to look at our own culture and our own visual heritage and look at that as an inspiration for stories. These are actually stills from the movie Krish Station Balti Boy. Probably quite a few of you would have seen them on Cartoon Network, and there is even now available on Netflix as well. So you can look at them. And these are actually, what we've done is we've taken the art from India. Like this is Thanka from the Buddhist monasteries, and then this is leather puppets from Andhra. This is Orisi Pat from Orissa. This is Ferd from Rajasthan. And these are actual stills from the movie. This is Madhubani. Look at this art. It's absolutely gorgeous, such beautiful designs, right? Again, this is so different from whatever we saw up till now, right? And yet it has its own charm, its unique beauty. And when you see something like this on screen, it will instinctively make you pause and say, yes, that's interesting. Let me look at it. Again, this is again one of the most popular art forms of India, the Mughal miniature or Rajasthani miniature paintings, again, very, very beautiful, very, very intricate. And I think when we started doing these movies, we had to look at our own style of animation, to create it. And I will probably in tomorrow's session, I will show you some of this as well. Again, Dakkani scroll paintings, you can still see them in the Salarjung Museum in Hyderabad. Has some wonderful collection of these paintings. This is Chitrakathi from Maharashtra. There's a wonderful museum called the Raja Kelkar Museum in Pune. If some of you are in Pune, I would again recommend that go down to the Raja Kelkar Museum. They have some wonderful Chitrakhati paintings. This is Kali Ghat paintings. I'm guessing if there are people from West Bengal, they might probably be familiar with this art. And again, I think for us, like, for example, we've often relied on folk stories from India, and like Gopal Bhar stories. Like this is a story of Gopal Bhar, the court jester, and there are some wonderful stories around Gopal Bhar. Probably kids may not have heard of him, but if you speak to your parents, they can tell you, he is the equivalent of the Gopal Bhar stories are the equivalent of Akbar and Birbal.
Munir, also sorry to interrupt you here. I'm so sorry. Thank you so much for your precious time. But we have some time limitations now.
Yeah.
We would like to devote some time for our participants to engage with you and ask some questions that they may have.
Yeah.
And I think from here we could pick up the discussion tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we can take it ahead from here.
Yeah. So
let's have some questions before we can wind up the session. Okay, so I think let's Aditi take one question, please.
So we have this question from Srinaja, who is asking, what is the scope of a career in animation in India?
Okay, great question. I think massive scope. If you look at the number of cartoon channels that have come up over the last, I would say 10 years. Just to give an example, when I started creating Krish and Balti Boy in 2010, there were hardly a handful of channels. Today, I think there are about at least 15 kids channels. There is obviously the OTT platform, right? So you have Netflix, Amazon, Hotstar, and there are more coming, correct? And then you have, of course, you have YouTube, where you can create your own content. You can always post it, So one is the audience, and again, the television homes. So if you look at the number of television channels, the number of television homes has increased dramatically. So given that there is literally an explosion in the amount of content that people are consuming today. Obviously in times of pandemic, COVID, so much time people spend on watching entertainment, be it OTT or TV, right? So when you have a massive demand in terms of content, obviously, and if you're in a field like animation, visual effects, or gaming, there's a huge scope. I would say that there is a dearth of people, there is a dearth of good artists, there is a dearth of good designers, there's a dearth of good storytellers. So when you choose this as a profession, you want to get into a profession where there is shortage of people, shortage of good people. So short answer, I think there is phenomenal scope.
Okay, great. Super. So there is a friend, Girvani. She has a question to ask. Girvani, could you please unmute yourself and come live on camera? Girvani, just please come online.
Yeah, we're not able to hear you. You want to type your question?
Sir, I made homemade glaze. Is it okay?
Okay, I think we are not able to hear her. Girvani, if you could just please mail us your question, we will be able to answer them separately. Definitely, we would like to answer them. We have Krish Kumar. Krish, could you please come online and ask your question? Krish, please unmute yourself and ask your question. Krish.
Okay. In the meanwhile, we have a question from Sakina, who wants to know how exactly do you coordinate the voice acting with the animation?
Okay, great question. So what we do is typically once our script is ready, we then go and actually record the voice. So what we do is that, let's say for example, if I'm creating a character, right, I would decide what kind of an actor I want to cast, and this is something that I'm going to be talking about tomorrow. So what I'm going to be, so when we look at something like casting a voice, I choose a set of characters and I basically actors, voice actors, and I call them for an audition. And then we also show the voice actor what is the visual design of that character. What does he look like? What is his physicality? Whether he's thin, whether he's fat, and what kind of a voice pitching I want. Do I want a deep voice? Do I want a thin voice? So looking at that, then we basically record the voice, right? And then once the voice is recorded, then we do the animation as per that, because that gives us timing, So within how many seconds is a dialogue being said? Because when I'm moving my lips, right, I have to literally draw every frame, or I have to animate every frame where I have to ensure the lip is in sync, correct? So we first record the voice and take that voice as a reference and for timing, and then we actually do the animation as per that.
Munjal sir, there is one question coming in from our friend Madhav Gupta. Madhav, could you please unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yes, sir. Sir, my question is, sir, there's a classic show called Tom and Jerry, sir, and they've got only a few characteristics like funny and there is no physics in it at all. But there are only like very few characteristics. What makes it such a big show and so so fantastic?
So why don't you tell me why do you like to watch Tom and Jerry? What is so great about Tom and Jerry, right? I'm sure you watch a lot of. I still watch it. What is interesting about those characters? So okay, let me answer that for you. So it's the constant battle between Tom and Jerry, right? Invariably Jerry always gets the better out of Tom, right? He always ends up defeating him or outsmarting him, right? And that is what you want to see. I think every time you want to see how does he do it. I think it's a foregone conclusion that Jerry is the smarter cookie and he will always eventually defeat Tom. Tom is this huge, massive cat. He's probably like 20 times his size, but how does, Jerry outsmart him? And in what way, what gags, how does he defeat him? What devices does he use? Again, if you notice, the entire Maramari of Tom and Jerry typically is inside the house. The setups aren't great. It's just the focus is on those two characters, and so it's a classic slapstick, genre. And there are many in that genre, if you look at like Roadrunner is one of them, or Bugs Bunny is again another genre. Like, I mean, they are endearing characters, right? So you want to look at these characters and what they do in situations, right? And that's what you are interested in because you're so invested with those characters, right? Like I said, that I still love watching Tom and Jerry. It's a great de-stressor. Just switch your mind off and just, have fun watching them.